Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Genesis Block. Today, we're going to be talking about another macro thematic topic, which is about the creator economy. And Sid Sangvi here is going to lead the discussion. So, without any further ado, I'll just pass it over to Sid and we can start talking about creators.
Yep. Awesome, guys. So today, he just mentioned, we're going to be talking about the creator economy, and to be more specific, we're going to be talking about the intersection between the creator economy and the ownership economy. And I'll definitely, get into what that means. But before I begin, let me just set the stage. Really, this is definitely going to be, probably the most macro theme we've covered so far. And if you already read or heard our discussion and newsletter on Web3 music, this actually zooms out from there. So there are going to be a lot of cross learnings that you can make from what we covered then and what we are covering today. And at the same time, this really encapsulates the ownership economy specifically. It encapsulates core theses from Web3 as a whole, and then relating it to the creator economy, it covers Web3's USP to all sorts of creators, irrespective of art form, right? So yeah, that's a specific thing to mention and keep in mind throughout. And just before I start, really want to shout out Legion from Variant. She's pioneered a lot, and maybe popularized is the better word. A lot of the stuff that I came across during my research, and I really recommend anyone interested in this to check out her research firsthand as well. So yeah, today we're going to cover, like I mentioned, just definitions of what these terms mean, right? We'll just do a quick history on the creator economy and the business models that are employed today and what they have, how they've evolved over time. We'll talk a little bit about the problems that today exist in the creator economy, and then we'll of course then get into how Web3, comes into the picture, or the ownership economy, how that helps the creator economy's problems, and the current of the creator economy and how it relates to Web3. And we'll close it off by just summarizing everything, making some predictions, and highlighting some considerations for anyone interested in investing, operating in this particular segment, right? So with that, let me start off with the definitions, right? Because that's important before going deeper. So a creator, that's probably the atomic unit of everything we're going to discuss. So a creator, to me, for this particular discussion, is an individual or a group of individuals who produce media with educational and/or entertainment value with the intent of growing and in most cases monetizing an audience. Now that's a bit convoluted to some, but this is just my particular definition. It's subjective. I've seen many other definitions, but yeah. So that's the lens where I'm coming through it. And moving on to the terms creator economy, ownership economy, and even passion economy, that's quite common in people in these circles. So how do we really delineate between all three of them? So the ownership economy, to me, is another word for Web3 as a whole, right? So it basically is, ownership economy is the use of Web3 technology to enable participants of a particular platform, product, and network to gain ownership stake in said platform, product, and network. And as you would assume, this permeates all industries. It's not necessarily only to say, content creators. It also exists in finance through decentralized finance applications, infrastructure through, like oracles or any particular infrastructure you could really think of, consumer apps, and even at the smart contract layer, right? Ethereum is a user-owned or a stakeholder-owned network. Moving to creator economy. So this is particularly, I know I define this as the rise of a creator class, a new creator class, led by digital distribution, who earn majority of their income by creating content and monetizing their audience for that content in various ways, right? And passion economy is probably the most abstract and zoomed out. is simply people making money doing what they love. Let's just go a bit deep on two of them, the prior to the ownership and creator economy bit. So I like to think about it as a Venn diagram, right? Where there's intersection between the two. So you can be a creator, you can participate in the ownership economy without being a creator. You can be a creator, but not own anything. And then of course you can do both, right? Which highlights the intersection. So what that intersection really means is you are a creator. You try to your goal is to create content and monetize it, and through that process, a segment of your monetization might come from owning a particular platform or a particular piece of a network, right? So these are abstract concepts, and we definitely go deeper into them. But with this background, let's move on to history, a bit about the creator, content creator space and the business models. Are you guys okay with if I go on, or do you have any particular thoughts, comments, questions?
No, I
Oh yeah,
think
go ahead.
yeah, that makes sense to me. I think in general, basically what you're saying is that the they both of these types of economies overlap, and the overlap is the interesting part that we're going to focus on essentially.
Absolutely. So we'll definitely touch upon what the creator economy is, because that's a necessary piece of the puzzle. And a lot of what is manifesting, what will manifest in the space is also direct derivative of what the problems are of the creator economy. So we'll be talking about both the creator economy and the intersection. So let's get into a little bit about the history. I'm sure you all have heard of the phrase "content is king." So surprisingly, I didn't know this until recently. Is that phrase actually was first brought to life by Bill Gates in 1996. He wrote an essay which was titled "Content is King," and in that essay, he said a few interesting things, and I quote. One of the exciting things about the internet is that anyone with a PC and a modem can publish whatever content they create. Content is where I expect much of the real money, much of the real money will be made on the internet, just as it was in broadcasting. And lastly, for the internet to thrive, content creators must be paid for their work. The long-term prospects are good, but I expect a lot of disappointment in the short term. End quotes. So as you can see, it's very prescient. A lot of what he said in 1996 has panned out and is panning out, right? Largest companies in the world are media companies. And as we're going to get into the problems, a lot of the problems, as he mentioned, that he expects disappointment in the short term, and that's exactly what we've got. But yeah, so this leads me into the journey of how the creator economy arose and what chapters it's had throughout its lifetime. And you can break it down predominantly into four chapters, right? So the first would be something I would call like the hobbyist era, which is essentially the rise of user generated content platforms like MySpace and the early days of Facebook, where the main purpose of a user was to follow people you knew in real life, right? And more often than not, the person would reciprocate with a follow back because you knew them in some capacity. And it was literally the whole idea was just to stay connected, know what the other person's doing in life, and there was no real monetary value accrual to anyone. So that was the first chapter. The second, then we could classify as the distribution era, which was led by the rise of the influencer, led by platforms like Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube, as they picked up. And here is when the phenomenon of unidirectional follow started, where a large group of people would follow someone who they don't really know, just for the content that they create. They want to just stay up to date with their content, and the creator would not really follow the individual back. And here is where monetization starts, and primarily it was all advertising, platform ad revenue, brand sponsorship, affiliates, and this really became a advertising channel for other businesses really to achieve their objectives. And the whole bi-directional follow social element reduced proportionally, to a proportion based on relative to how it was earlier. And then that brings me to chapter 3, which is probably where we are right now, is where creators have become that big that they've become a brand on their own, and now they are, moving off these platforms to start their own businesses as independent brands. So like platforms like Patreon, Shopify, Substack have allowed these phenomena to happen. And this also, I would say that this is when the thesis of 1,000 True Fans was, led by Kevin Kelly back in 2008, where his thesis primarily was an individual creator can make a sustainable living just by 1,000 True Fans, 1,000 people who really resonate with you and want to follow your content. And I would say that wasn't really possible until now, until this chapter 3, where there are these assorted monetization methods, um, all the way from advertising, which continues, but now you can sell various digital physical products very easily, and of course a third medium is through investment. So with these three broad business models, the first two are probably the most utilized. Advertising is very straightforward, right? Creators pay with their effort and and even financing the content that they create. Audience pay with their attention, and advertisers buy the attention. um, and this three ways is a pretty symbiotic relationship up to a particular point, because then you sometimes lose the authenticity of your content, but broadly speaking, this works pretty well. The second is the selling model, where you sell physical digital products. This allowed the creator to capture more value and deepen their relationship with the fans. And this is also symbolic of a macro shift away from the industrial era, where products were mass produced and they were essentially commoditized. But now the same products are being imbued with some sort of meaning by the creator themselves. So when you buy, say, any cosmetics versus a Kylie Cosmetics, it means something, right? Um, and this has really been led by the rise of these various tools that I mentioned earlier: Patreon, Substack, Shopify. You have Teachable, Gumroad, OnlyFans, and so on and so forth. And lastly, the invest model, which is probably the most underexplored. You have a lot of investors who have actually become content creators to, in fact, and then leverage their audience for their investment purposes. So you have, Jason Kalakanakis, you have Anthony Popliano, Lee Jin, Kevin O'Leary, Gary Tan, all these guys. But you've not really seen creators who become investors, right, as much. And you could, and I would argue it's because the skill set is just harder, it's a steeper learning curve. But also, in my opinion, the areas where they can invest in, are good at investing, didn't exist. So what that means is, a content creator would be really good at investing in another content creator, but the tools to do that were premature. And this really leads me to chapter 4, which is Web3's introduction to the creator economy, right? So this is the intersection that I mentioned earlier between ownership and creator economy. And this whole era, which you could argue were in the beginning stages or at the later stages of the prior era, but here is where the lines between creator and an audience really blend. Becomes less of a transactional, of a like content creators create content based on inputs from their fans, and as you will learn soon, they also have ownership, right? Going back to the intersection. So we'll talk more about this chapter 4, but I mean, for now, let me just say that this is best exemplified by the rise of NFTs, right, which acts as ownership, an ownership stake, and also alignment of ownership stake, and also a monetization tool for fans, for creators. So I'm intentionally not going very deep into this, to chapter 4 right now, because that's what we'll get into shortly. But yeah, so those are the 4 main chapters of the creator economy so far, and how we've introduced ownership into it. by chapter 4. Any questions, thoughts on these particular this categorization?
I think
I mean, if I
yeah,
could,
Yash, go on.
if I could sum up, so basically the first aspect was, is the internet in its infancy, and we didn't know what the right monetization model was, and that was just kind of an introduction where creators realized that they could auto-publish their own content, and they don't need to go through big distributors, be it a newspaper or a record producer or whatever. They could publish it for free on the internet, but obviously that's not a conducive model because they need to be rewarded for creating whatever they're creating, which is where part two comes in, where there's platforms like Instagram, Facebook, these big social media platforms where people amass big followings, and but the only way they could monetize was through ads because that's exactly what these platforms are. It's like, and how these platforms make money is taking a cut of the ad revenue that you as a creator are creating for anyone who wants to advertise their product. And then in part three, basically, these creators now had access to platforms where they could more directly access their customers or their fans essentially, and not have to pay as much of a platform fee and not have to rely on ads to sell whatever they're selling, and directly just sell what they became famous for instead of selling someone else's product. And this model works really well with Web3, obviously, because Web3, as we know, replaces platforms with protocols and becomes a much more trusted system where ownership is clearly defined and you're not relying on centralized parties to prove that ownership, and you're also creating data and fans that is composable as opposed to earlier where you're in different centralized siloed ecosystems where you can't move from one to the other field.
Yep. And just a way to demonstrate what the power of the create economy actually is okay. So take the example of a newsletter writer on Substack, right? So you've got one of the more famous ones, and one of the ones that I've subscribed to for a very long time is Impacting the Comic, from Not Boring. And I think he must have what, about 180,000 subscribers until now, which is, I mean, definitely in the higher end of things. But even if you say that, let's say, 5% of them are willing to, let's say 5%, let's round up to like 10,000 subscribers, right? Like 5% is 9,000. Let's say round up to 10,000 subscribers are willing to pay, $5 a month for his articles, which I actually feel like is a very good price. Let's say they're paying $5. He's earning $50,000 a month, $360,000 a year just from writing his articles. And I'm sure there are, out of the 180,000 people, 10,000 who would be actually willing to pay for this. Plus, then you've got, institutions, etc., who would want this type of research, who would want to make it proprietary. So what this brings about is an audience. It brings about it brings about publicity, and it brings about an integrated revenue stream, that frees people up to do quality work that they want to do, and democratize it as much as you can, right? So Sid, the question I would have from a Web3 perspective is, what is the step change or the additional benefit that Web3 brings about, in your opinion, to move from step 3 to step 4? That's kind of because step 3 is getting more and more established now. And what is the additional benefit that you can get from being on Web3 rails and using the benefits of blockchain technology and all of those things?
And if I can just add to that, if you see from step one to step four, the audience that you need gradually becomes smaller and smaller as you sell more to this smaller audience, right? So if I'm selling $10 worth of stuff to 10,000 people, as opposed to $100 worth of stuff to 1,000 people, I'm still earning the same number of money, but the 1,000 people would be much more engaged with my content as opposed to the 10,000 people, and probably leads to stickier customers, which is where I think the whole 1,000 true fans thesis comes from, right? Where you just need 1,000 people really engaging with your content and willing to pay a very high premium for it, as opposed to just a regular subscriber or a follower. And
Yeah.
the question is, do you think Web3 will further enable that that monetization where you need less and less followers to make the same amount of money or even more.
Yeah, no. To answer your question, Yash, yes, in short. And in fact, Legion, wrote a piece, which furthers the 1,000 true fans model to 100 true fans model. And the whole idea there is, via these tools, Web3 tools, which we'll talk about, you can generate more value and capture more value from your super fans, right? So yes, you can definitely that whole trend of monetizing less and less people is true and is happening. And so that to your earlier question of what does Web3 offer and what is the step function improvement, right? There are a few, but I mean at a macro level, before, because we'll definitely get into that section, but just quickly to answer your question, I mean, it's ownership, right? Ownership is the main change that we're going to witness, right? And what I mean by ownership is the platforms themselves, right? Will be owned by the creator, and through alignment of those two, like the platform is not going to be solely focused on profit extraction, but an endeavor, whatever that might be, that is in alignment with what the creator wants, and that also could be whatever they want. Through that alignment is where we'll see a whole host of things, right? So that's the main thing, and then we'll see many specific smaller ancillary benefits, like you could say hyper-specific data insights, right, through on-chain metrics. You could have composability, like Yash mentioned, right, which once you have various third-party applications built on a particular decentralized application, the risk of the application shutting down doesn't exist, right? And nowhere near as much as when third-party applications were built on Facebook and then Facebook just shut the API, right? That's not going to happen.
And also, just to interject in that, actually, just another point to add to what you're saying is that Messari, which is one of the biggest crypto analytics platforms there is, crypto analytics and research, their website, their newsletter was actually shut down by MailChimp. I think it was MailChimp for a little while, and it was deplatformed, and then they didn't send out any newsletters for a few days. And they had to move their newsletter hosting from one platform to another. And it took a lot more time than it should have taken. It took like 5 days or so, and that means that they lost a week of content, and they were just flailing around in the dark, going like, "Well, what am I doing? Why has this happened to us?" And being in control of your data, and the platform only being a way to show what to showcase, and as a to host your data essentially, and broadcast it to your audience is a much better paradigm than the one where we have currently, where you're just at the behest of an entity that can just shut you down at any moment. So this isn't this isn't something we're just saying it might happen. It's happened very recently with one of the biggest crypto publications.
It happened to bankers as well. They got randomly deplatformed from YouTube. So yeah, but this is a great segue to the next part of the discussion, which is the problems, right, with the current state of the creator economy. Like you mentioned right now, deplatforming, censorship, those are huge problems. But in short, users create most of the value. They capture only some of the value, a fraction of it, and the rest of it is captured by the platform. Now, why does this happen? There are the misaligned incentives are probably the number one reason. Chris Dixon actually has made a pretty cool chart that explains this well. And in a nutshell, it's in the early days, when the platform wants to grow, like growth is their primary. When I say growth, I mean to bootstrap the supply and demand side of the platform. At that time, everyone's incentives are aligned, so it's a pretty harmonious relationship. But once they, when the platform has achieved a strong network effect, then their incentives go very much towards generating shareholder value. as opposed to what creators want, which is engaging their relationship with audiences, monetizing the audience to a greater degree, getting more insights into the audience, and so on and so forth. And that's when the relationship goes from, it starts being very extractive for the for all the stakeholders in the platform, like the users, any creators, the developers that are building applications on top of them. So that is probably the main reason. And another few noteworthy emergent phenomena that happens in the creator economy is earnings is concentrated in the top fraction of creators, right? And we see that quite often, where a small percentage earn the bulk of the revenue or the value that's being created. And the reason for this, to my best understanding and my best, from what I've seen and learned from others, is it's the infinite distribution problem. So when content can be distributed and accessed by anyone, everyone wants to consume the best content, which is understandable. It's a rational thing to do. And the way I understood this is, if a doctor is 10% better than the rest, that won't attract 10% more demand. It'll attract all the demand, right? So it's the same thing with content creators, right? And this is, I mean, this is just the reality of things. So this is one reason why the skew is so strong towards a few creators getting a lot of the, earning most of the value. But yeah, so just so that's one thing to keep in mind. And another thing that I want to touch upon is, for creators, right? Platforms exist on a spectrum of how friendly and how friendly they are for that particular creator. So from least to most friendly, you could say that, there's a platform that only helps you build an audience, right? Something like Instagram. You don't earn any revenue. It's just purely getting distribution. Then you have platforms that share ad revenue, something like YouTube. Then you have platforms that enable subscription revenue, right? So as you can see, as we're going down this trend, more and more monetization is being accessible to creators. And the end of this particular train is when the platform owner are the users, right? And this is the only time when the platform doesn't have to actually extract value from the user, from the content creator, to be valuable as a standalone company, right? Otherwise, if you notice, in all other situations, the platform has to extract some sort of value from the content creator in order to be a sustainable company on its own. And right now, this issue, this misalignment, has been solved by ESOPs, really, by giving equity. But as you would assume, that this only solves for the operator, right? Not the actual content creator on the platform, who arguably creates much more value, right? The largest ones, because they drive the other product, really. If there's other product, there's no company. And so with this being the cutting edge, you could think of the problems right off the bat, right? I mean, it's restricted by geography, by legal infrastructure. So it's very localized to, say, Silicon Valley, right? And this does not address, like I mentioned, this does not address the users or the content creators at all. So in conclusion, creators don't own their content, third-party developers can't control their code, and consumers, as in the users, can't influence the policies decisions of the platform that they use, right? And the business model, therefore, is very opaque, it's advertising based, and it's dependent on closed garden networks. And this always ends up in outsized control and value control to the platform itself. And with these problems, these are problems that the ownership economy in Web3 tries to solve, right? So, like I mentioned, the ownership, go ahead.
Just one thing, sorry, just to confirm, right? So in terms of when you're saying platforms start prioritizing shareholders over users, and businesses the business model optimizes for ad revenue. So essentially, the real world impact of that could be, let's say, that doctor example that you use. If you're like 10% better than the other doctors, everyone will go to you. So you're essentially saying that the platforms will pump demand towards the best creators, the ones who are like in the top 10%, even though like the bottom X% are very useful, and they're still earning a living. They're still being able to be creators. And the platforms essentially prioritize the best performers essentially at the expense of the bottom X%. And that's what a fundamental misalignment might be.
Right. So, like in other words, what you're describing is the long tail is not being served appropriately, and it's only a very small, the top fraction that are being served in a, let's say, sustainable manner. And so that's one example. But another example of how incentives are misaligned, and the outcome of that is what we talked about Bankless, right? Bankless is, at least in the crypto niche, probably in the top fraction, but still because of the content they are producing, that might not be in line with, say, the philosophy of the company, or the company, or like say platform might not want to be exposed from a legal angle or legal perception. So they banned the channel, right? Because they must have thought crypto's, a gray area. We don't want to be exposed to it. We don't want to, get negative sentiment because of them being on our platform, so we'll ban them, stuff like that. So that's an example of how maybe the platform didn't want was prioritizing shareholder value over the content creator themselves.
Yeah, especially if there's nothing legal involved. It's just a very it's an individual decision that a platform is making.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and that's at the expense of creators again.
Absolutely. So it's very subjective, and that's why going on to the next point, which is next part of this, which is Web3, right? How does that help everything? And the ownership economy, essentially, like I mentioned earlier, right? It's the thesis where the next gen of products, service platforms will be owned and run by the participants via alignment of incentives using tokenization, right? And two main things here: ownership and tokenization, right? Ownership, first of all, is important to understand. This is not, it comes in various shapes and sizes. So the broad three categories that I put it through, that you can think of it as, is financial, governance, and social cloud. So to be an owner, you could do that by participating in the upside. You could also be an owner by having say in the future of any particular network platform, so on and so forth. And another part is, you could be an owner for just the social cloud of saying that you're the owner, right? And these are not always separate. These can have a blend of one or more, two or more of these particular buckets. And this ownership, right, is powered and enabled by tokens, and tokens are really a protocol level innovation, right? This is technology that helps that step function change, right? So similar to how SMTP allowed emails, right, to email to exist, tokens allow these platforms in the future which are owned by the users. And another cool way that I think Jesse only mentioned this was, tokens are an internet native property right system. So way to own a piece of the internet itself. And this piece of the internet can represent anything, right? Any digital property, artwork, virtual land, anything really. And so far, we've only had Bitcoin and Ethereum as truly scaled up user-owned networks. But you can already see how tokens help that exist, how help that happen, right? One particular point that I see a lot of people, and myself included, grappling with is, it seems like tokenization is very similar to equity. So then why even tokenize in the first place? Like, what is the actual benefit of it? And I mean, at a high level, it's because it's internet native. And what this allows is it inherits all the properties of the internet. So it's, instantaneously transferable. And it's fluid. So today I can own a token, tomorrow you can, which is very hard when transferring equity. And you only need internet to perform these transfers. And because of that, it's not bound by geographical limitations. And overall, this just gives more liquidity, right? So in a nutshell, tokens are more accessible, and secondly, they're programmable, right? you don't need middlemen to perform any particular transfer. You can, for example, royalties, right? What we spoke about in the Web3 music piece. You can trust that token will the royalty via these tokens will end up at the right place automatically, right? So these are the two main benefits that I see. Is there anything that you guys want to add on to how tokenization is, helps building on the equity model?
I would actually try to offer a counterpoint in the sense that tokenization is, it is one aspect, it's one way that you can enable the system. Another way in which you can do it is through a collection of smart contracts that represent ownership within the smart contract via smart contract states that are easily verifiable and that don't need a token itself to generate value. There are a lot of benefits to tokens, but there are also a lot of drawbacks in terms of, firstly, like there's legal and regulatory considerations over how tokens may be classified. Secondly, there's UI UX concerns in terms of how tokens are actually and in terms of adoption of a Web3 economy. And thirdly, the thing is that if you want payment to be done atomically, you can use stable coins. If you want ownership to be represented, you can do it via a smart contract. If you want something to be programmable and something to be automated and work the way you want it to work, you can do it again via smart contracts. You don't necessarily need a token. So I wouldn't necessarily say that tokens are 100% better than equity, in the sense that, well, I mean, in this context, tokens are better than equity, but I wouldn't say that they're the only way to implement this from a technical perspective. You can do it without tokens, and to be honest, this goes back to my point that I've been making since we started this pod, which is you need to very, very, very clearly outline why exactly a token is better, and the way to do that is to judge it against another model which can give you the same results as a token based model can. Again, and I'm not saying a non-blockchain based method, I'm saying a smart contract based method. But it's very important to very clearly outline why a token is technically better to implement than a bunch of smart contracts that can represent the same thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
I agree with that. And to add on to that, tokens inherently, are created in such a way that they become ripe for speculation, right? Like any kind of new novel token mechanism, regardless of its fundamental utility, because of the nature of crypto and how nascent it is, it's still so narrative based that if something new and exciting comes along, it can experience a massive increase in token price, and then the token price can crash, ultimately killing the project. So there needs to be more sustainable ways for tokens to actually accrue long-term value as opposed to accruing value just because of speculation. The speculation ultimately kills a lot of projects long term due to various different reasons. But the main reason is that it's a flywheel effect that goes positively, and the minute there's even a slight bump in the road, that flywheel effect just leads to negative reflexivity instantly. And you can see that if you look at any crypto token so far for the last 3 years, they all have the exact same barbell graph. And there is a reason for that, and that is just because the main utility of these tokens is speculation and not much else.
yeah, no, absolutely. So I agree with you guys, but one thing that I'll highlight is, when I say tokens, I don't mean always these specific tokens randomly minted by a particular group of people. For transfer of value, even a stable coin is a token at the end of the day, and ownership can be um, can be resembled by NFT, which are non-fungible tokens, right? So I don't mean that I don't know, any random meme coin has to be used for for when tokenization is coming into the picture. USDC is a token as well that is being used for and is probably the better choice for if currency is what you want to use, what you want to achieve, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just wanted to like draw a line under that, like in a sense that you're absolutely right, and that's kind of the direction that we should be going in. But like the reason that Yash and I think mentioned it in the manner that we did was because of the way that tokens and tokenization has historically been defined and used in this context. And the NFT part of it still doesn't discourage speculation, and speculation is a bane in many of these situations, and distracts from the actual real value that is being accrued or not, and also distracts from the ownership and all the benefits that you are getting from blockchain and from like the underlying smart contract innovation that's taking place, right? So which is why I am a bit cautious around tokens, but I completely get your point that like it's not only the one narrow form of tokenization that we are referring to, that were initially referring to.
Yeah. Cool. I mean, good points, definitely, and worth keeping in mind for anyone. Let's just in the sake of time, move on to the next point, which is how Web3, and to your earlier question before, what are the actual material changes that Web3 is offering, right? For the positive trend of the creator economy. So first, like we already alluded to, is digital scarcity, and this basically restores pricing power to creators, right? Second is being a fan is not passive anymore, and it becomes more and not just and supporting them is not just an altruistic activity. You can actually earn you can earn a financial return for that, for supporting an artist or a creator, right? So this whole concept was termed by Jesse Walden as patronage plus, so patronage with the potential for profit. Third is third is basically composability. You can program these various economic models that permeate across the entire creative value chain. So a great example is the music stems the music stem example that we gave in the Web3 music piece, which is the melody can be an NFT made by one person, the baseline can be made by another person, and they all get accrued their revenue, their royalty appropriately. Another great example is memes. I think that this definitely is going to be a thing. It already is, but to a greater degree, where memes are made out of various elements, and various like the caption, the base image, and so on, and they all can be owned by various people, and then wherever the meme is reproduced, the rightful owner gets royalties. And lastly, lastly is the ownership bit, which is creators own not the content, or not only the content, but the platform itself. And this ownership can be, then actually be leveraged via, a DAO structure. The governance can be done by the members, and then there's no external shareholder that is, pressurizing for profit extraction and increase in shareholder value, because there aren't any shareholders really. So these are the main 4 buckets that I would say it helps. And what this has really, translated to is, number one, the creator life cycle has really changed. From earlier, it was, they create content with the hope someone likes it. Then if someone does like it, they build an audience, then they monetize it, and then at one point they scale it up to an entire business. So in this model, they're really taking a leap of faith, and it really and most creators struggle from the catch-22, where to make money you need an audience, but to grow an audience you need some resources to fund the content creation. So where Web3 helps is essentially a bootstrapping tool in the early stages, where a creator can essentially fundraise for a particular piece of content, and then use that to not just get the resources, but also get some sort of direction of what type of content that particular audience group wants, and then they create the content, and then that's how they bootstrap their initial content creation and audience creation, right? So, and of course, this takes also from the patronage plus, right? That is why they would actually fund a creator in the early stages. Of course, you still need a little bit of hustle in the beginning. That's not going to go away. You can't just mint money out of thin air based on a random story. But this makes it much easier for a lot of people to get started in content creation, right? And this also then this also helps because fans then become stakeholders, and then they basically become the evangelists, and your de facto word of mouth, to at least the beginning of the word of mouth for distribution. So this really has a lot of synergistic relationships. So yeah, that's one really important point. Second is platforms become protocols, right? So this is something that I'm sure you all both are well aware of. Is now the atomic unit is not atomic unit, but the foundational layer is not the platform, but is the wallet. So if the platform goes, it doesn't really matter because the wallet still exists and all the data associated with it still exists. So you can just spin up a different front end. So platform as a concept um, are not as prominent as protocols. Um, and lastly, we are. This is going back to the digital scarcity bit, that over the last decade or so, content has really become commoditized, right? And the user, you and like all of us, we are reluctant to, we don't really value content from a monetary perspective. We expect it for free. And this is going to change, right? At least I'm not saying that all content is going to be you have to pay for it, but the idea of paying for content is going to become much more normalized, essentially. And this if I had to put this into a phrase, I think it was Davy Greenberg, some chap I saw on the internet. I'm not really sure who he is, but he said, if I do a job in 30 minutes, it's because I spent 10 years learning how to do that in 30 minutes, and you owe me for the years, not the minutes, right? So this whole idea is going to become much more normalized in the content creation space specifically, right? And yeah, I think that covers the initial. And I want to just highlight a few examples of how fan owners have really become a thing and have actually scaled up to not a large degree, but at least in the early stages. So you have Shibuya. Shibuya is an interactive anime that has been funded by just random people, by users,
I
and they
think
are
it was founded by Variant as well.
yeah. So Variant then later invested. But it is actually individuals uh, who are helping the storyline develop as they make it. So they make a particular scene, then the token holders dictate which direction the story has to go, and then they further continue the story. Another is Mad Realities. That's like a reality dating show where they launched token NFTs, and now the holders have these various rights. They can nominate people who come on as guests and so on and so forth. And these both have, and if you look at the content itself, is actually like you wouldn't expect it to be bootstrap, but you'd expect it to be any other regular TV show which has the potential to scale up, right? So interesting stuff is happening definitely in this um, let's say creator fan interactive content creation, right? And funding, of course.
Just another riff on this creator model that you're talking about, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily only need to be like an inverted playbook in terms of issuing the tokens, activating the audience, creating an audience content, managing and growing a business. What I think actually works is a combination of both models, where you start using a platform akin to Substack, right? You can even use Mirror if you want to stay very close to your Web3 ethos, and start creating content, start getting do advertising the Web2 manner in terms of Twitter, doing like SEO, doing those kinds of things, build up a small audience, and then try to and then once you've got a track record, right, once people know exactly what you're doing, then release NFTs, then start engaging with that core audience, and then growing your ancillary audience, essentially. Like, I wouldn't like to say ancillary audience, because every audience member, in my opinion, paying or not paying is as important. But in general, like, you can have things that are more special for more paid members, and you can have content for everyone else as well. And I think that there's actually a merging of the two models that needs to happen rather than one model replacing another in its entirety. Now I think that and I think that the creator economy has to be built upon all of the ideals that you were talking about and all of the benefits that you were talking about: permissionlessness, trustlessness, ownership of data, all of those things. But the monetization aspect of it is kind of really, it is more of a strategic decision from creator to creator. And you can, and the beauty of this model is that you can implement it in the way that you want to do. But yeah, I think that, the best way to do this would be to merge both models, because it is important to understand and realize that, the third model that you spoke about, the Substack model, is really not something that, firstly, it's still nascent and it's growing. And secondly, it's not something that's entirely valueless. It's got a lot of value, in my opinion. And you need to leverage that value as a creator, as well as leveraging the value of Web3, and the benefits that you get through that. So to fully maximize the content that you're creating.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This by no means is going to be a replacement. It's definitely going to be additive to the current, the current paradigm. And like I mentioned earlier, the Web3 part of it really comes in. I mean, beyond the infrastructure level benefits, which of decentralization, censorship resistance, all that. From a monetization perspective, that's really going to Web3 is just going to enable superior monetization from your hardcore fans. That's in a nutshell, in a very basic term. That's what's gonna enable. But the pyramid of your passive fans, your mid tier fans, and your super fans, right? That pyramid is still going to exist. You're not like, if you don't, if that doesn't exist, you're just not maximizing your potential as a creator and growing your audience.
Right. I wanted to speak to like a more futuristic kind of concept, I guess. And if you look in, like the past 50, 60 years since there's been, a stream of content creation, over time, regardless of whether it's music, TV, whatever, newspapers, the cost of creating content over time has gone down. And ever since the advent of the internet, it's gone down drastically, right? And now there's AI, which is basically taking that cost of creating content even further down, because you can outsource a lot of menial tasks to AI, and eventually by looking at ChatGPT and DALI 2, you can even make the AI do creative tasks. So let's say Harry Potter, for example, they have a huge franchise, but it costs them a lot to create content, right? And because of that, they can only push out so much content. But what if they could start implementing AI and coming up with brand new storylines using the AI, and then outsourcing the generation of that content to another aspect of AI? They could very soon create a shit ton of content way quicker than they normally could, right? And because of that, and this applies to everyone, right? Whoever doesn't use AI is only left behind. So the question is, if the price of creating content is going to zero, and anyone in the world can create any kind of content, then is content really king anymore, or is curation going to be king in the future, right? Because at the end of the day, I still want to see the best content, but if there's an infinite amount of content out there, how am I going to know what's best unless there's an amazing curator who has a similar taste as me, who I end up following for the content he's curating? So it's just an open-ended question: is content still going to be king, or is it going to be curation?
Yeah,
If the cost of creating content goes to zero.
Yeah, I don't think it's an either or. I think curators as a class of stakeholder is going to rise in prominence. And we're already seeing that with various meme accounts. They are basically they're curators. Um, uh, uh, at the crux of it. But I definitely think content, like to your point of say ChatGPT, right? I think the highly creative content is still, we're still years away from ChatGPT or any equivalent AI creating such content. So I mean, from that standpoint, I think it'll really weed out. Um, it'll weed out, the real content which doesn't really is not really superior than what is possible by AI. But second is, I also think there'll be more reliance on distribution capability, which is kind of going to your curation point, but it has some, it's not identical. the individual who creates content can be the guy who distributes it. So I would say that, curation will be important, distribution will be important. How you distribute it, just doesn't really matter. Going via curators one way. If you have your own distribution channel over the years, that'll also solve for cutting through all the noise of all the content out there. So yeah.
I would say I actually agree with Yash in the sense that I think that that curation is the most important aspect of this, because I mean, okay, just take my example, right? I sign up, I mean, as you both know, I sign up to like a bunch of newsletters, so many, and there's so much going on Substack, and so many interesting articles on Substack, Medium, Mirror, everything about the Web3 space, that it's impossible to know what exactly to read and like what is best for me. So if I could have something more curated, which is actually newsletters in some manner, that go through articles and go like, this is the best things we've read, that is a form of curation as well, and I feel like that is extremely important. um Distribution is more of a marketing strategy in my opinion, because there are going to be so many different distribution channels for this type of content, and we are again examples of this. We're part of the create economy, right? Like, we create a podcast and we choose distribution channels like Substack or Mirror, maybe. If you want to upload articles, we try to put stuff on Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube, and those are distribution platforms. And as more and more distribution platforms come up, we are very happy to put our content on as many platforms as possible. So that's more of a marketing strategy that is dictated by what is available, and what your target audience is reading. But curation is more like an indicator of quality that's going to become more and more important as the volume of content increases to stratospheric levels. That's my opinion.
Yeah, no, I don't think.
Agree with that.
I'll just push back a bit. I don't think distribution's a marketing strategy. Distribution is something you need to get your product, whatever it may be, into the hands of the user. Now, one distribution strategy could be going through a curator, right? Like, you could achieve distribution via curator. You could achieve distribution by direct selling. You could achieve distribution by paid ads. That's just a necessity of doing business. Now, the point I was trying to highlight is, and then, yeah, I definitely agree, curator is going to be very important. But I think that's just one way of achieving that distribution. And the actual point for any creator will be what is the best way for them to get distribution. Maybe for one particular creator, their best form of distribution is partnering with another creator in the same industry, and because their audience will be exactly the audience they want to reach. So there'll be like different ways, but curators will definitely will rise in prominence significantly when there's so much content.
Yeah, maybe I said marketing strategy is the incorrect terminology. It's more like growth, and it's just more like a growth strategy, right? It's like, how exactly am I going to get this into the eyes and hands of people who I want to watch it? That's basically what I meant.
Sure, cool. No, definitely important points to keep in mind. Let's move on to the landscape. So yeah, so currently, I mean, to size the industry, it's quite difficult. Because the more the tools are being built, the more people want to become content creators, because in a way we're all content creators. It could be via text, it could be via photos, videos. Like, we all create some sort of content, and it's just a function of how easy it is to put it out there that determines if we actually put it out there or not. And of course, willingness as well. But for a lot of people, if Twitter wasn't there, then they would not really be what they write was not going to be they're not going to go through extra loops to create an email list and so on and so forth. So basically, it's there are varying numbers on that, but regardless, the point is, the industry can be categorized in three main chunks in terms of what tools there are. The first category is tools to help you create something, right? So tools to help you create content. Second would be to grow your audience, like reach an audience, grow your audience, and engage with your audience. And the third bucket of products would be to monetize that audience, right? So if you like every single creator economy platform can be categorized in these three buckets. So we'll definitely put examples of these in the newsletter. But going to Web3, I think that we're going to see the same thing. The products that are built in Web3 for the creator economy, right? They're going to be either helping to create content, growing your audience, increasing engagement, monetizing, and last thing I should say is also managing your business, right? Even though this is not specific for creator economy, but I mean it's definitely a important part of it. It has significant overlap in the creator economy. So in Web3, I mean, going back to the real world asset, piece that Siddharth wrote, you categorized it into two sections: rebirth and birth, right? Similarly, I think we're going to see the same thing. Rebirth are simply tools that mimic Web2 solutions, the creator economy, right? So if you have distribution, if you have like Spotify, you have Audius, right? If you have engaging with your audience for the
Substack and Mirror,
right? Exactly. And monetization as well. We still haven't seen a lot of these layout, but this is my hunch. And at the same time, you have these new products altogether. So a good example of that is Prolab.land, which essentially token gates your Discord or your Telegram. That's completely new. And then we'll see stuff like that as well, right? So we'll also put on a map of what products are there in the ownership economy and the creator economy in the newsletter as well. But I would say,
and if you want to manage your accounting, you can use QuickBooks, but stop using it after a little point in time, when you start earning a little more money. And that's a reference to FTX using QuickBooks, by the way.
Several billion-dollar company should be using something better.
Sorry,
go on. That was just a cheeky interjection.
It took me a second to understand it, but I got the reference. But yeah, I mean, I think from in terms of the current, the landscape, we'll put in specific names in newsletter, but these are the broad categories where people are building in. Is there anything that you all want to add here, or should I move on to the conclusion?
I mean, I guess the main one is, which we not touched on, is social. So, Length and Farcast are the biggest players, and they can be compared to, I mean, actually, Length can't really be compared to anything because it's an entirely new form of, creating Web3 social apps where the data is, instead of being siloed, it's open, and it's the app that you can, get in and get out of, but while maintaining your data, which is like the complete opposite of what exists on current social media applications like Instagram or Twitter, where followers are only followers on that specific platform and nowhere else. While on Lens, it's people are following your social graph, and you can take those followers to whichever app.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This would be a great example for the the both category of Web3 applications for the creator economy. So absolutely, yeah, I think that's a great example.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's conclude this this discussion now. So I mean, just to start off, if Web3 platforms are better, why don't people switch? That's a common question that people have. I mean, the simple short answer is network effects and education. Right, people are not as savvy to make that technical jump, and there has to be a critical mass of people on a new platform to incentivize the switching cost to be incurred. Right. The good news is that tokens are a financial incentive to make that change. So in time, hopefully, in a time period shorter than one that we would expect, hopefully this transition will happen. But beyond that, there are other external factors like legal gray areas and even cultural taboo that that we need to overcome. And I think it's a function of time till we overcome those two at least. And I think we're just waiting for a success story, really. As soon as there's one success story, I think the discussion will seriously the sentiment around the discussion will change.
But also, you say you need to make a technical jump. What have you been saying? You shouldn't need to make a technical jump. Like,
Right. No,
I mean,
I
yeah,
guess
I
he
mean,
meant that UI needs to be
yeah,
simplified
exactly.
for an
Like, you
app.
don't. The point of Web3 should not be to shove it into everyone's faces that you're using Web3. The point of Web3 should be that it improves experiences without anyone knowing what's happening with the backend. That's it.
I mean, yeah, that's what blockchain is. It's a new way of creating backend systems. So it literally should not be spoken about ever.
yeah, I think that's all we do about it, talk about it.
Yeah, that's
But
all we
yeah,
have. Are backend engineers. It's quite boring, actually. About it. Or not
yeah.
even engineers, just backend writers. Anyway,
But yeah, so I mean, to your main point of not needing to be technical, yeah, I mean, we just need to abstract that away. Over in time, that should be resolved. Uh, the legal and cultural taboo too should be resolved. So let's see. Some predictions, I think, NFTs will become quite ubiquitous as and normalized as any other file type, JPEGs, MP3s. We've already gone over why this, the benefits of NFTs, so I won't get into it now. I think more basic and obvious predictions, there'll be more capital deployed. Interesting stat that I found out was this Red DAO. Red DAO is the largest deployment capital in digital fashion, NFTs and startups inclusive. And as of mid 22, they only deployed $10 million, which is nothing. Fashion is a multi-trillion-dollar industry. So, it's sometimes astounds me how early we are. Token distribution, like Siddharth, you were mentioning, is something that's very important. So expect many more experiments into why a token is needed, if it is needed, how it is actually executed, and so on. Next point is expect more creators to become investors. I think the ability for people to invest in creators as an asset class is just broaden the the landscape of investments, and a lot more people now are going to be involved. Essentially, Web3 allows the tools for that to be for that new asset class of investment. So and specifically for the long tail, right? So the top creators already could, because they have the financial resources to figure it out, essentially, right? But now even the long tail can. Another point that I personally think will happen is influencer incubators. So this is a natural extension, or I should say, a tool for creators as an investment class. Influencer incubator already have existed in China. They've scaled up in China. Actually, a company called Ruhan IPO'd. But in the Western world, we really haven't seen. We saw Jake Paul with his experiment called Team 10, but for some reason it failed. I think it was an execution error more than anything, but also the infrastructure was not there, right? Because Web3 just makes everything much more easier in terms of coordinating. Like in an incubator, you need to coordinate a lot of people to add value to the people who accept in the incubator. So it just makes it much more easier, and then of course on-chain royalties and upside is captured and distributed evenly. So I personally would expect this, and this is more of a scaled up version of the music VC DAO thesis by Multicoin, which just expands to all creators really. Next, additional monetization tools will unlock the creator middle class. So essentially, going back to what we discussed early on in the discussion, which is the long tail will be able to monetize better because they can monetize better with a smaller audience, right? We definitely saw this whole play out by people selling high value products like online courses, but personally I don't think that's sustainable because we've not really experienced a significant macroeconomic downturn, and in such a time it's difficult for me to believe that people will just be buying like $500 courses left, right, and center. So NFTs and other Web3 technology just allow another avenue for monetization. And lastly, I would say that I think, and this is one I thought a lot about, but that at least I believe firmly that creators are going to become and are going to need to become creator entrepreneurs. And I know a popular retort to that is, artists want to just do art. I mean, and the only way to reconcile that is them essentially becoming lean startups, like super lean startups, where there's an artist and then there's one financial guy, one marketer, and then that's basically like the whole company. So I think that's a trend. And funnily enough, there's this artist called Daniel Allen. He's really, been spearheading the Web3 movement in music specifically. And this model of a lean startup, him being the face, is the emergent organization structure that he's opted for. So I would expect more of that to come. And yeah, I mean, considerations to be made, like we alluded to earlier, that giving tokens can jumpstart network, but it's clear that it's not de facto a sustainable advantage, right? Like you mentioned, the negative reflexivity is indicative of the tokens more being of speculation than actually being used for as ownership vehicles. And of course then you have Axie, that being one of the poster boys, and then mostly yield farming being examples of the same thing. And lastly, tokens it's not an alternative to product market fit, right? You still need to build something that people want. And great examples, OpenSea, right? It doesn't have a token, but still other NFT marketplaces can't seem to compete, or are at a significantly smaller scale. So yeah, I think I think that covers everything. Do you guys want to just add anything to the conclusion?
I think you covered
that
really well.
that was very, very wide and informative, and hopefully the viewers also think the same.
Yep, exactly. And yeah, thanks Sid for going into such depth on this topic. It's super interesting. And yeah, token and token-based Web3 models are the way forward. It's step 3 to step 4. So looking forward to seeing how we can, as an industry, simplify this and make this experience better for creators, and just grant more ownership. And at the end of the day, the opportunity is vast, because you have the ability to make, in an era of automation, and an era of where AI is threatening and people are scared of AI threatening their jobs, creative endeavors, making them more monetizable, is a way of ensuring that the economy stays afloat and gives people new meaning to do things. So the ownership economy is not just a fad; it's a way that the entire labor market could evolve, and it could act as a bulwark against automation of easy manual labor jobs, and give people new avenues to actually be independent employed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect.
Cool.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for watching, guys.
All right, see you guys.
Cheers. See you guys on the next one. And yeah, thanks for tuning in. Peace.